ahead and get started. My name is Emma Masek, and I am a Public Information Officer for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. This media briefing will include safety reminders, updates, and a general overview of the Wisconsin gun deer season. Joining us this morning, we have Jeff Pritzel, DNR Deer Specialist, Aaron Larson, DNR Deer Herd Health Specialist, and Joe Mulrooney, DNR Recreation Warden. With that, I will turn things over to Jeff.
Hey, thank you, Emma, and good morning, everybody. Welcome back for our annual, preseason gathering to talk about what expectations for the 2025 gun deer season have in store for us. And the first thing I want to talk about is the change in deer management units. We've been talking about this really for about a year. So a lot of people are already familiar with the changes that were made over the past winter that affected the northern forest and central forest deer management zones. And those change in zone boundaries also impacted the central farmland zone. So it's a year that's important for people to check the map, check in their regulations. We have multiple resources on our website, versions of the map to help people interpret, what deer management unit they are hunting in this year. And that's important when it comes to acquiring antlerless harvest permits. And much of that has already happened, but we know from past experience that during the week leading up to the gun deer season, we'll sell over 100,000 deer hunting licenses. So there's a whole cohort of deer hunters that may not have been plugged in yet, and will be, really just thinking about this for the first time, in the coming weeks. And so we want to make sure they're aware of those changes, especially in the northern forest zone. And those deer management units, the label of the units in the forest zones changed from being referred to by their county to a numeric label. And so we have deer management units in the 100 series in the northern forest. Units in the central forest are now in the 200 series. And then the farmland zones, they remain county-based deer management units. And so we want to make sure people are aware of that. Both from acquiring antlerless permits and when it comes time to register a deer, if they're successful, that they know what deer management unit they're in. As far as expectations and a forecast going forward, obviously there's many factors that can work for or against hunters in terms of the conditions on any given year. But if we look at what's happened so far, right now the archery harvest is running a little bit ahead of last year. The youth firearms season that occurred in a weekend in October was one of the highest harvests that they've ever had, second or third in history as far as that harvest. And so it would appear, deer are out there on the landscape. And again, coming off of 2 mild winters, it would suggest deer numbers should be a little higher in the north. Deer harvest opportunities in the north are better too, with the permitting of or availability of antlerless permits under the new deer management units. On the other side, it's one of the not the latest, but one of the later dates for opening of the gun deer season, and that late opener moves us a little further away from the peak of the rut or the breeding season. And we know that every day that we get further away from the peak of the rut, which is essentially right now, we lose daytime deer movement activity. And so there can be a noticeable difference between a gun season that has a later starting date versus an earlier starting date. And we're on the late side this year. As far as food sources, which are an important aspect to consider with where deer are spending their time, and we know that this is a good acorn year, a good acorn crop. It can be a curse or a blessing. That means there's abundant food, and if deer are still keying off of acorns as a food source, it helps to know that. But also abundant acorns can lead to limited daytime deer movement because they're finding their food sources easily. And so they're not spending as much time on the hoof, moving around and feeding during daylight hours. And so that's just something to consider. Going as we're going forward here, as of this point in time last year, license sales are actually up a fair amount. But it's too early to speculate whether that just happens to be people are getting their licenses earlier this year, or if there are incentives that are getting more people to purchase a license this year, whether it be considerations of domestic meat prices or other considerations. So that'll play out over the next couple of weeks. Again, that week before the gun deer season, you will sell over 100,000 licenses. So what happens that week will really determine with whether or not license sale trends are up or down. They've actually been quite stable the last couple of years. So we'll see how that shakes out and talk about that more after opening weekend in our next press briefing. And finally, on all of those notes, given the opportunity, given the considerations, this is certainly a year, especially in the farmland zones of the state, where we have been chronically challenged with harvesting an adequate number of antlerless deer. I think this is a year for hunters to really think about being a hunter for their community as a whole, not just for themselves. And so the opportunities to take in additional deer and share that with their community, whether that's through the formal deer donation program that the department has had in place for decades now, or just sharing amongst themselves. I mean, all of us as hunters know families that maybe aren't hunting anymore, maybe they've aged out, but certainly would appreciate some venison in their freezer for the winter. So this is a great year to be thinking about taking an additional deer and being a hunter for the community, and being looked at as an asset for the community, both in terms of sustainable food acquisition and managing deer populations, where we know in certain areas there's a lot of conflict with our considerations, whether that be car deer accidents, crop damage, property damage, those types of things. So we would love to see this be a year where we see an increase, especially in that antlerless deer harvest over the course of the gun season. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Aaron Larson, and I'll be back for questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. I just want to share some information about chronic wasting disease and deer health before the 9-day starts. So for 2025, CWD sampling is available statewide. It is still free for any hunter, but we do have areas that we're especially interested in getting more samples from. So those are our sampling priority areas, mostly in central and northern Wisconsin around some newer detections. And that really helps give us a good picture of what's occurring out on the landscape and at what level CWD is in some of those areas. We have resources available for our hunters. If you do want to get your deer sampled for chronic wasting disease, we have a map on our website that has all of our sampling locations. Two of the main options are self-service kiosks, where you would go without anybody there, but all the resources that you would need to submit your deer for sampling is available. We also have staffed locations like meat processors or other businesses where there are folks that can help you out. And on that map as well are disposal options, mostly deer dumpsters, so deer waste dumpsters. So as far as disposing of your deer waste after harvest, we just recommend to think about disposing of your waste responsibly, especially if you're moving it away from where it was harvested. So what we want to avoid is having a deer that could potentially be positive for chronic wasting disease brought to a much further away location and put out on the landscape where it could potentially introduce chronic wasting disease. So some of those options are if you're wanting to dispose of it so that it ends up in a landfill, which is what we recommend, you could potentially use your curbside pickup. If that's allowed, you could use one of our deer dumpsters. It could be buried if you're able to put kind of a layer of soil in between the carcass and where other animals could come in contact with it. Or, it can also, if you're not moving away from where you harvested it, can be left out at that location of harvest too. So that map that has those resources on it, I just encourage hunters to check it frequently as closer to the 9-day, there could be some additional options pop up on there as well. If you choose to get your deer sample for chronic wasting disease and it does test positive for CWD, we do issue a replacement authorization. So what that means is within a couple of days, you will get a new tag added to your Go Wild account. If the positive was an antlered deer, you get a statewide antlered harvest authorization. If the positive was an antlerless deer, you get an either sex harvest authorization added to your account. Those are not weapon specific. So say a hunter got a positive during the bow season, got that replacement authorization, they could use that then during the gun season as long as they have the appropriate license. Another thing I want to ask our hunters as we are heading out more into the woods in the next couple of weeks and for the 9-day potentially, to submit any reports of sick deer that you see, whether or not that's a deer that you're going to harvest. We need the help to track any trends that are occurring throughout the state. If there's anything that we're seeing in larger groups of deer that we may want to collect samples for, those reports are really valuable to us. So we do have a place on our website where you can send an email or a phone call that you can leave a message of where you saw that sick deer or group of deer. And then lastly, I want to mention baiting and feeding regulations. Just a reminder that the map on our website is always going to be up to date. For 2025, we do have 2 new counties that have a ban this year that didn't during the hunting season last year. So that's Manitowoc and Clark. And then also want to mention we have 2 counties that are going to have the baiting and feeding ban removed November 9th if there are no additional positives. So Sawyer and Rusk will have the ban removed on November 9th unless there was another positive captive or wild in the area. They are included because of a captive facility in Washburn that was within 10 miles of those 2 counties. So if there's interest in that area, know that can still change right up until the day that the ban would be removed. And of course, it can be added at any time too if there is an additional detection. Also, I guess I'll add on a little bit to the deer donation program. Just give a plug for, we work with the Department of Health Services on testing requirements. So as Jeff mentioned, the deer donation program is a great way to help provide venison to others, maybe allow you to harvest another deer that you don't need within your family. But there are counties that do require CWD testing before it can be donated to the food pantry. So just know that you may need to get that step done before it's dropped off at a meat processor. And with that, I'll pass it over to Recreation Warden Mulrooney. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Every year, conservation wardens investigate a number of hunting-related incidents during the gun deer season. And as you join those hundreds of thousands of hunters this gun deer season, we ask that you keep in mind the 4 basic rules of firearm safety that most of us remember from our hunter safety class from years ago. Tab K. Everyone should keep in mind Tab K when they head out into the woods. T is treat every firearm as if it is loaded. A is always point the muzzle in a safe direction. B, be certain of your target, what's before it and what's beyond it. And K, keep your finger outside the trigger guard until safe to shoot. Following these 4 main rules of firearm safety will reduce most hunting incidents this fall. So keep those in mind. Also, with gun deer season coming up, people are going to be climbing tree stands, different kinds of stands and trees. So we ask that you inspect those tree straps, those buckles beforehand, make sure they're secure, they're working properly, they're not torn. We ask that you wear a full body harness. Every year people fall out of tree stands, fall to the ground and are injured. Those full body harnesses, if there's an incident, you slip, you fall asleep, something like that, it can keep you in your seat and prevent you from falling down to the ground. When you're climbing those ladders, climbing those tree stands, keep 3 points of contact with the tree or the ladder, either 2 hands and a foot or 2 feet and a hand as you're climbing. We ask that you use a haul line to haul your weapon up to the stand and down to the ground when you're done. And remember to keep that weapon unloaded. So keep your rifle unloaded or your shotgun. Keep that bow, keep the arrows in the quiver as you're hauling that weapon up. That can help you prevent an incidental discharge and help your climb up and down your tree more safe. If you're climbing a tree, using a lifeline can really help you stay connected to that tree as you're climbing up and climbing down. Most of our hunting incidents occur while climbing up or coming down. So keeping connected to that tree can help keep you safe in that regard. Blaze orange requirements, 50% of your clothing above the waist has to be blaze orange if you're hunting. If you're wearing a hat, 50% of that hat. Make sure you look at that blaze orange. If it's faded or it's in poor condition, replace it. Blaze orange is relatively inexpensive and helps keep hunters able to see you when you're out in the field. If you're in a deer drive, make sure everyone knows what the plan is and sticks to their role, and you're wearing adequate orange so you can see each other. Every year, someone seems to be injured in a deer drive hunting incident. So kind of have that good communication ahead of time so everyone knows where everyone is. Non-hunters, we ask non-hunters to wear blaze orange if you're going for a hike through the woods, or even if you're in your backyard or walking along a rural roadway. Throw some blaze orange or fluorescent pink, something high visibility so that hunters can see you, not mistake you for something else. And that includes your pets. If you're taking your dog for a walk, maybe find them a nice blaze orange or high visibility garment to wear during the gun deer season. Off-highway vehicles, ATVs and UTVs are frequently used by hunters accessing the woods, hauling deer out of the woods, etc. Remember seatbelts and helmets when operating those vehicles to help keep you safe. When transporting firearms in ATVs or UTVs, they have to be unloaded. So make sure to remember to keep those unloaded. We ask people to drive those ATVs and UTVs and hunt while sober. Using alcohol or drugs while hunting or possessing a firearm is illegal, and it does make the woods less safe for everybody. So try to refrain from alcohol and drug use while hunting this deer season. Hunting incident information can be found on our website. I think Zach might have put the link up there for you. And then this deer season, we all see things that may be violations. Just keep this in your back pocket, 1-800-TIP-WDNR. That number is staffed 24/7. You can remain anonymous, and you can report hunting violations, fishing violations, public land violations, any DNR-related violations for us to follow up on and investigate. In addition to that, to sum that up, we ask everyone to have a safe, enjoyable hunt, and thanks for keeping safety and ethics in mind this gun deer season.
Thank you, Joe. We do have time for a little Q&A now. I did see some questions pop up during the presentation, so we'll start with those. Raymond says this is a question on the deer donation program. If hunters have spare venison or game in a deep freezer from years past, are they allowed to donate that to food banks as well? And what would be the process?
I can take a first stab at that, and if Aaron wants to back me up, or correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm going off of, I know years ago my local food pantry would accept that donations of prepackaged meat, and I don't know if that's a policy that is pantry by pantry or if they operate under some statewide guidance from DHS or DATCAP that requires certain procedures on that aspect. So I think the short answer is reach out to a pantry locally and see how they handle that situation to get that guidance as to whether they, because it could either be pantry by pantry's policy or they're under a statewide requirements outside of the DNR's purview.
And then I see a question from Roger too. I was asked this morning if the deer season was going to be ran longer due to the SNAP program and to have hunters donate venison to the program. Do you have anything we can speak to with that?
Sure. Currently there is no discussion. We do have much more, abundant opportunities that already exist after the 9-day gun deer season in the form of the muzzleloader season and a 4-day antlerless season after that, and in much of the farmland part of the state, additional firearm seasons. And so years ago, and I know, Roger, thinking back decades ago, periodically we did extend the 9-day gun season, but that was during an era when the 9-day gun season really was almost the exclusive opportunity. And so with the current additional opportunities that we'll be talking about after the gun deer season, there's no discussion of any changes to the season structure or formats this year.
Thank you. And I see a question from Katie. Go ahead.
Thank you. Given the new deer consumption advisories in the Stella area because of PFAS, some hunters have wanted to know if there's options to get their deer tested for PFAS. So I was wondering if the DNR is offering any kind of testing, and if not, are there other options for hunters to get their deer tested?
The DNR doesn't have any offerings for that. I do see our Wildlife Health Section Supervisor, Jasmine Batten, just turned her camera off, and she is dealing more with PFAS than I. So, Jasmine, if you have anything to mention, please feel free.
Can you hear me okay, Erin? Erin was going to handle that question just fine, but just in case, I figured I would let her know that I was ready. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of private options for that. It is an expensive test, and we do not have a mechanism for individual deer testing. And right now, in terms of our research in that area for this year, there is not additional testing in that area. You could contact the State Lab of Hygiene. That is where our testing is done. But I think for most people at this point in time, that testing is likely cost prohibitive.
Thank you. And I see a question from Chris in the chat. What is our estimated deer population this year?
So as a very broad estimate, and this has been the case for the last number of years, as we go into the deer season in September, we tend to be running right around 2 million animals across the state of Wisconsin. And of course, that sounds like a lot of deer, of course, but those animals are very unevenly distributed on the landscape. And so high deer population doesn't mean that there is deer everywhere. And even in our counties that traditionally and annually generate really high deer harvests, there are certainly areas and individuals that don't experience that abundance of deer. And so not to suggest that means there's, again, the old term of a deer behind every tree, but we have been at that almost 2 million mark as a rough estimate going into the deer season. We've already harvested close to 70,000 deer through the archery seasons. And we typically take, around 200,000 deer during firearm seasons. And so as a general rule, we've got about 2 million animals on the landscape. The hunting season will remove 300,000 to 350,000. And so, we'll still have even 1.5 million at least, deer on the landscape after the season's over.
Thank you. Katie, I see your hand raised again. Go ahead.
Thank you. I was just wondering, you mentioned the new MUs. I was just wondering if you've heard how it's gone so far with the archery season and hunters making that adjustment, and if there's been any concerns so far.
I would say from my perspective, it's been very quiet, which we would interpret as good news. We were getting a fair amount of feedback earlier in the year when we were going through the process of establishing those units. And as we go through the establishment of the season, which occurs back in April, May, and June, we certainly were receiving more favorable, but some concerns, understandably. But no, it's been really quiet. Again, deer registration seems to be right on par with what we saw last year, a little bit ahead. It will be difficult to do the comparisons that we usually do after opening weekend and after the season to say, hey, here's where we're at compared to last year, because it'll be kind of an apples and oranges comparison with the changes. So it'll take us a couple of years to develop a trend. But overall, we're not hearing any concerns as it relates to adjusting into the transition of the new units.
Danielle, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Jeff, I'm hearing you say that it'll take a couple of years to determine trends, but are you expecting that the changes to the DMUs will result in higher harvests in northern and central Wisconsin over time?
Well, if that happens, and in the northern part of the state, we live with dealing with an annual roller coaster of ups and downs that have different factors. Specifically, the winter weather can have an impact independent of our permit availability. But one of the main reasons for going to the habitat-based deer management units, or going back to that format that we had over 10 years ago, was to be able to better carve out areas of the north that had more abundant deer densities could provide more opportunity, and then those areas that we know, should be more conservative. So by virtue of the fact that some areas are being treated more conservatively, but there's other units now where antlerless harvest opportunity can be made more available, it would be that additional antlerless harvest that could increase overall harvest numbers. What we'll watch over the course of time, whether that has an influence on a buck harvest trend, that will remain to be seen. Given what we've seen over the past 10 to 15 years, we've had a very stable buck harvest in the north, given those annual oscillations. So there's potential for that to change, but I suspect our buck harvest opportunities or harvest numbers will stay relatively stable, but there'll be increased opportunity for overall harvest in the select units where we can identify that opportunity should be made available.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? If so, feel free to raise your hand or drop them in the chat. Oh, I see a question in here from Roger. Who is the proper person to be called for hunter harassment?
I can take that question. Roger, the proper person to be called for hunter harassment would be your local conservation warden. You can advise people to contact our tip line at 1-800-TIP-WDNR, and we can send the appropriate personnel.
Thank you. And a question from Raymond. Go ahead.
Yes, just making sure that there was no issue with transferring venison outside of tags when we're talking about the deer donation program. I know that there's typically you're not supposed to be selling your venison. Is this outside of that?
If Joe wants to chime in after, but I'll just say, I mean, the deer donation program does not represent any exchange or barter, which is currently out, state law, your reference to, there's no exchange of compensation for that. So the ability to gift venison, whether it's through the formal deer donation program or to an individual, is certainly permissible.
What Jeff said.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, Danielle, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I had a question about the CWD, like the replacement harvest authorization. I'm just curious, like, have you gotten any data back on that? Like, are we seeing a lot of people finding positive tests of deer and then seeking out a replacement?
So they don't have to ask for that replacement authorization. It's just automatic. So, whether or not the hunter chooses to use it is certainly up to them, but we automatically will add that replacement authorization to their Go Wild account. So it'll just be listed with all of their other tags if their deer test positive for chronic wasting disease. So, there are some exceptions. If it's a car kill, they registered it, that doesn't get a replacement authorization. A nuisance or ag damage deer does not get a replacement. And same with a CWD surveillance permit, that doesn't get replaced either. But all regular deer harvests would get that replacement authorization automatically added. I do not have data off the top of my head on how many of those get used, but I do certainly know that hunters are appreciative of that option. They don't have to tell us if they're going to consume that venison or not, or if they choose to dispose of it. That is up to them. They will get that replacement authorization regardless. And a lot of hunters do take advantage and use that to harvest another deer.
Any other questions? All right. If questions come up later or you're watching this after the fact, you can send us an email at dnrpress@wisconsin.gov and we will help you get your questions answered. Again, if you have additional questions, email us at dnrpress@wisconsin.gov and we will get those questions answered for you. Thanks for tuning in this morning. Have a great day.